It's a policy change President Trump insists will correct what he called a terrible and misguided deal by his predecessor. Trump's recent announcement on new travel and trade restrictions with Cuba aim to fulfill a campaign promise. Easing of restrictions on travel and trade does not help the Cuban people, he said at an event in Miami on Friday. They only enrich the Cuban regime. But while Trump's policy backtracks on some of President Obama's efforts to engage with the island, key directives will remain in place. Here's a look at Trump's policy toward Cuba. In December 2014, Obama announced a historic deal to gradually rebuild the economic and diplomatic relationships between the two countries. As a part of the deal forged with Cuban President Raul Castro, Obama eased economic and trade restrictions that dated back to the U.S. embargo on Cuba that began in the 1960s. As part of the agreement, the two countries reopened embassies in each other's capitals. Restrictions on American agricultural and telecommunications equipment to Cuba were eased, and it became much easier for Americans to travel to Cuba as regular air travel between the countries was restored. In turn, airlines and U.S. hotel chains began investing resources in Cuba, while chicken, grain and other agricultural producers from the U.S. exported tons of products to Cuba. Cubans, who had little access to the internet, also found themselves able to browse online. Moreover, Obama's efforts allowed Americans to use credit and debit cards in the country and to send money to relatives in Cuba from the United States. Last year, Obama traveled to Cuba, becoming the first U.S. president in nearly a century to visit the island. As a private citizen, Trump criticized the effort. This flowed over into last year's campaign, with Trump vowing to terminate the agreement. In the weeks after his election victory, Trump forcefully hinted at his plans for Cuba. If Cuba is unwilling to make a better deal for the Cuban people, the Cuban American people and the U.S.